Hello. Thank you so much for joining us for this Q&A virtual panel discussion of the documentary you've just watched, Flint, Who Can You Trust? Today, we will be speaking with Dr. Mona Hanna Atisha, who was the pediatrician who first documented rising blood lead levels in Flint children after the water switch. Trishelle Young, a Flint resident and attorney who has represented Flint residents in the various legal actions related to the water crisis, and Anthony Baxter, the director of the remarkable film you've all just watched. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with us. We don't have a ton of time, so I'd like to just dive right in and get started. Anthony, you've been working at Flint since 2015. Can you tell us how you started this work?
Yes, I was in Detroit. I'd just shown a film called A Dangerous Game, which was about big money golf and its consumption of water, amongst other things, around the world. And we'd shown it in Detroit, and somebody came up to me after the screening and said, you should go through to Flint, because not only do they have huge sky-high water bills, because at the time in 2015, you may remember, in Detroit, water bills were sky-high. A lot of people had their water shut off, and the same thing was happening in Flint. But there, of course, there was the added thing of the water just being of horrendous quality. So I had my camera with me, and I went over to Flint for the day and met some of the residents there, and was just really shocked by what I saw, because that was before any of the water testing had been done, before Dr. Mona Hanna Atisha's work and Mark Edwards from Virginia Tech, before he had come to Flint. But at that time, the residents were mobilizing themselves to have that citizen testing done. And then Mark Edwards came to the city. So it was that really that started. And of course, at that time, it wasn't a story. Nobody had heard of what was happening in Flint. The residents certainly heard about it. They'd been shouting loud about what was happening for a year, but nobody listening, and nothing was being done.
I'm just going to not mute myself, and Caitlin will hopefully help that out. Trishelle, you're a resident in addition to being an attorney in Flint. When did you first notice what was going on with the water?
Oh, it was immediately noticeable. As soon as they switched the water, there were odors coming from the water. The water was very discolored. People started complaining immediately that something was wrong with the water. And immediately the response was, the water is fine. You're overreacting. You're exaggerating. You'll be okay. Just flush it a little bit. So there was a lot of denial and minimization from day one. And that really lasted for an extenuated period of time. Like Anthony said, until we were able to get Mr. Edwards in and start testing the water, and then Dr. Mona, released their results from their finding, it really didn't take traction until the community really came together and continued to make noise.
Mona, your research was really one of the many turning points in the evolution of this story. There was, the state was saying the water was fine. The testing Mark Edwards and others were doing were showing it wasn't fine. And your results that found actual elevated blood lead levels in children really settled that he said, she said. But your work was the target of Governor Rick Snyder's office really tried to undermine your credibility in this work. What did that feel like?
It was difficult, but it wasn't just me. And like Trishelle just said, and like this incredible movie shares, everybody was being dismissed and denied and attacked. Anybody who raised any concerns about the water in Flint was being silenced. So when I released my research, which I never should have done, and I'm so glad Anthony captured the parts of the story that are often untold. Like, this story should have ended when the first mom held a jug of brown water. Like, enough. Like, that should have ended this crisis. It should have ended when, General Motors noticed rusty car parts. It should have ended when Mark Edwards, through amazing citizen science, showed us that there was lead in water. Hard stop, end. It never should have gotten to the point where there had to be scientific proof that kids were in harm's way. But throughout this whole process, it was an attack on anybody who tried to say anything that there was something wrong.
Yeah, that was a real stunning part about reading all the emails that came out and the undermining of credibility. And it was shocking how determined that effort was. But can you talk a little bit about how that kind of doubt sowing impacts the ability to communicate urgent, accurate information in a crisis?
Yeah, I think there's this is happening right now. This happened in Flint. So in Flint, we kind of got practice on how to handle a public health crisis. But when science tells you there is something wrong, and when people are in harm's way, communication needs to be quick, it needs to be transparent, and it needs to be clear. And that was not what we were getting from multiple levels of government for a year and a half. It was a constant reassurance that everything's okay. Relax, in quotes. You have nothing to worry about. It's fine to drink this water. Just flush, use the filters, then don't use the filters. So there's a whole science in public health called risk communication, and everything that was being communicated was done poorly for a year and a half. And when we kind of tried to be clear and say, hey, kids are in harm's way, we need advisories and we need emergencies. People need to stop drinking this water and use filters or bottled water. That message also got muddled by so many folks who wanted to continue to silence the story.
So, Trishelle, can you tell us a little bit about what your life is like right now when it comes to water?
So, and I think I told Anthony this, many, many years ago, but I still don't bathe or shower in my house. And, I have a 4-bedroom, 5-bathroom, beautiful home. And the pipes have been changed. The pipes from the house to the street have been changed, but I just don't trust it. I think the exposure is still there. And it's really just from the breakdown of trust from what Dr. Mona was just saying. I mean, we have checks and balances set up throughout, from the city to the state to the federal level. Every level failed us. There was no checks and balances. They reinforced the wrong, and it was just amazing. How we felt so violated. It's just going to take years to recover from that. And even now with the pandemic that's going on, there are so many people that are distrustful of taking the immunizations right now, simply because they don't know who they can believe. Thank God for people like I said, Dr. Mona and Dr. Reynolds, health professionals that are in this area who we have been able to trust from day one, who give us accurate information. But to listen to politicians, that is just a non-starter for, I would say, a majority of this community at this point.
So what would it take to make you trust the water?
That's a good question. And I really don't have a good answer for it. I don't know that I ever would trust it again, to be honest with you.
Wow.
Because they messed up the testing. They didn't test the water where it should have been tested. And there are ways to manipulate test findings. And so now that we know the government has engaged in that type of manipulation, how do we know they're not doing it again to avoid another crisis? We just don't know. That trust has been so deeply violated that I don't know how we're going to ever truly recover and have trust in government again.
I'm so sorry. That's not fair. It's horribly unfair what's happened.
It's incredible to think, actually, just hearing Trishelle talk there, Nancy, about the distrust of the water today. And we think of how during the COVID pandemic worldwide at the very start, we're all told to wash our hands constantly. And imagine being in Flint and not being in a position to trust the water still coming out of your tap, and feeling that sense of complete abandonment as well. And I think it's really, really telling that Trishelle, as an attorney in Flint, is still, not trusting the water. It's horrifying to hear.
It is, and it's one of the hallmarks of one of the things you need for people to survive. You need clean water. You need it's every ancient civilization founded its communities around a source of water. Not an accident, kind of a thing we need. So, Anthony, when you started making this movie, is this the movie you thought you'd be making? There's been a couple of big twists and turns in this documentary. How did where it ended up compare to where you thought it would go?
No, it definitely wasn't the film I thought I was going to be making at the start. I mean, at those early days when I was saying, when I came through, and then Professor Mark Edwards arrived, and then Dr. Mona did your really important work and making that link with the children in Flint. There was that, at that point, it was then covered by the New York Times. And it became a big news story. Everybody will remember it was the top story across the United States and the world. Mm-hmm. And it was an extraordinary moment as the media descended on Flint. But then, of course, when the switch back to the Great Lakes happened in October of 2015, the cameras left, and I think there was that feeling at that point that was the residents had won the day. They'd won this big victory, but really, in many ways, that's when the story started, because it was at that point there was all this constant confusion of messaging from the state to the residents. They didn't know who to trust. They didn't know what to believe, and then, of course, various actors come into Flint saying they are going to help, and people can trust them. And so it was so awful, really, to watch the whole thing unfold, but also tricky as a filmmaker, because so many avenues you can go down. And there were lots of people, I remember at the time, saying, we're going to do a documentary on the Flint water disaster. And some of those films never got made because it was just, as Trishelle has just been talking about, it's still going on. And in many respects, I think it would have been better for us if we'd been able to do it, to have made a series. Because in a 2-hour film, you can only really tell part of that story, because there are so many elements that I've filmed, like, for example, the Lauren family, when they go to Washington, D.C. to get answers and try to find, answers from those in power. And those key moments of the many families I followed that we just weren't able to include. But what we did was we followed that story of trust, and it's the one that I think is reflected in what we've been hearing so far about our feelings in the current climate and political climate, how people still really struggle to trust those in a number of different stories. And that in the Flint water disaster, I think, is the key one. And so although Governor Rick Snyder has finally faced some charges and could face up to a year in jail if convicted, many people feel no justice has been done, and the story continues. We'll have to wait and see what happens in that case.
I would love to hear reaction from others on the panel to the criminal charges against Snyder and other members of his administration. Trishelle, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I can tell you that we were ecstatic, first of all, to hear that charges even came. We were doubtful that they would come at all, but we were happy that they came. But I can tell you, I'm a primary criminal defense attorney, and I deal with murders and, all kind of levels of homicide. And I've had many cases where if you help someone before, during, or after the commission of that crime, you were charged just as if you were the one who pulled the trigger. That didn't happen here, and the system, there's so much systemic racism that we're already dealing with. We still feel like what's going on with these charges has a lot of biasness to it. And it really does not deal with the level of culpability that we think can be proven based on the facts and circumstances of this situation. And so we're glad to see some charges have come, but we would have been happier to see the charges that really fit the actions that were taken in this case.
Yeah, Nancy, I would just add, people used to ask me a lot, like, who should go in jail? Like, who should be charged with crimes? And I used to deflect. I'm like, talk to the lawyers like Trishelle. Like, I'm just a doctor taking care of the kids to make sure they're okay. And the more, I practice in the community and the more I interact with folks, the more I realize that this kind of concept of justice and accountability and truth and reconciliation is actually also very much a doctor issue. It's a health issue. Because without that, you can think of the Flint water crisis as an open wound, like a literal open wound that has not healed for years, and it has not healed. And it will start to heal. There will be some closure if we can get to some level of accountability and restorative justice. And I'm grateful for the criminal charges. I don't know where they'll go. And I'm grateful for the work with the lawsuits and the class action lawsuits, because we need to have some sort of justice. And another thing I've learned, and you can ask 10 people what they define as justice, and you'll get 10 different answers.
Absolutely.
Everybody has a different kind of definition of what is justice. For some, it's, the Medicaid expansion is great, or getting their pipe replaced is great. And some, like, this person needs to go to jail.
Yeah. One other thing I would say about Governor Snyder's charges is, he is a very, very wealthy man who has access to the top lawyers and the pockets to pay for those lawyers. The people of Flint don't have that luxury.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about the settlement, Trishelle, and the other legal actions? What's going on?
Sure. So we were able to secure the largest settlement in the history of the state of Michigan at $642 million. But there's been a lot of issues surrounding it. I know right now McLaren has decided not to contribute the amount they originally wanted to contribute, which was $20 million. They're trying to reduce that down to $5 million. There's a lot still going on. Several defendants that are not part of the settlement, so we will end up having trials on those cases. So this case is far from over. And, we've just been, I'm so thankful for the legal team that I'm a part of, with Pitt, McGee, Palmers and Rivers, and Hurwitz, Goodman and Hurwitz. And we just have such a dynamic legal team that has really put their money where their mouth is. They have come in and fought for the residents of Flint. Flint has had a voice in this process for the last 5 years, and it has been very costly. It has been hard work. Everything has been appealed all the way up. Every time the defendants lost, they appealed us, but we still came out victorious in the end. And I think that's why you saw such a large historic settlement. But this case is far from over. And like Dr. Mona was saying, our residents have such a different viewpoint on what justice means to them. The money in and of itself is not going to restore the city of Flint. It's going to take a lot more than money to do that.
When I was watching the movie, I was thinking about the class action lawsuits, and I felt that could have been another chapter to the story. And I understand, like, it's hard to end a movie or a book when the story is ongoing. But the most recent kind of controversy has been the lawyers, some of the lawyers, not Trishelle and her awesome team, but some of the lawyers that are based out of New York City that have been using this X-ray scanner on children and to determine how much lead they were exposed to. It's not supposed to be a thing used for humans at all. It's something you put on walls. So here are these, other lawyers that we're supposed to trust, and they're supposed to be the good guys, and they're lying to us too. So there's many other chapters of this kind of ongoing saga that could have been added to this movie.
Absolutely. Anthony, I think you hit it earlier when you said, after the fact, after all the cameras left, we had to deal with people coming in trying to be the savior and, and saying what people want to hear, and it just led to a lot of more faulty actions and another deeper level of violation of the trust.
Yeah, even every sector and lawyers, also academics, they're like, oh, we could do research here. Like there's money here. Like, so we call them piranhas. Like lots of folks came from many different sectors to for their own self-interest. And for so long, I felt like I had my hands over the kids. I'm like, go away. We got this. Go away.
Well, one of the figures who came in, it was one of the strangest parts of this movie. Scott Smith from a group called Water Defense that's backed by the actor Mark Ruffalo, who played the Hulk in the Avengers, like, which is just kind of a whole crazy set of modifiers to string together there about water testing in Flint. But he came in, talk a little bit about, you know, this man who came in promising that he had this, you know, revolutionary sponge technology that was going to detect all sorts of problems. How did he get such traction, and how much damage did he do?
I think, you know, like
that, Dr. Mona.
residents, well, I was listening very carefully to Scott Smith when he came in, and Mark Ruffalo. And when Scott Smith talked about this revolutionary sponge technology and how it was detecting a lot more chemicals in the water than anybody else was detecting, because he'd been trailed as a scientist to begin with by Mark Ruffalo, he was actually named his chief scientist. When he came to Flint, that was downgraded to chief technology officer, but still he had a sense of authority, and the people thought he was a scientist, absolutely. And so when he went into people's homes, I, like many of them, were documenting it, felt, oh, he's really getting to the root of the issue here. And it was only really when Mark Edwards and his team at Virginia Tech started to question findings that Scott Smith was coming up with, that you know, I began to think, hang on a second. And it was also very difficult as well, I think, because he was telling, as just saying, you know, telling the residents what they wanted to hear as well, in the sense that they were being told that the water is safe. They didn't believe that. And here was somebody confirming that and revealing a whole lot more that was in the water as well. And so it was really, really tough for the residents to navigate that. I mean, it was impossible for, on the news, he was talking with and giving credence and authority to tell people that they shouldn't be doing this, that, and the other, because his latest research had shown things that the state were essentially covering up.
You know, that was so heartbreaking, that part of the film where, like you said, he was telling people what they wanted to hear, but often we say that about good news, that someone's being falsely optimistic. But the things that people wanted to hear were, it's much worse than they've been telling you, and I'm telling you the truth about it. And it just struck me as so poignant that folks had been lied to so much that the thing that they really wanted to hear was confirmation that it really was this bad, that there really were problems. Trishelle, can you talk a little bit about just living with that constant feeling that the other shoe is about to drop, that things are worse than you could possibly imagine?
Yeah, and Nancy, that feeling, that wanting to be verified that the water was worse, really stemmed from them denying that it was bad in the first place. You know, it came from, you denied that there was anything wrong. Now you're saying it's okay. It's not okay. You know, so somebody needs to come out and say this water is not okay. And so, you know, I understand what you're saying in terms of why would we want somebody to validate that? But what we wanted was the truth. That's all we wanted. What we wanted was test results that we could rely on, that we could depend on, and then for them to do something about those test results. We had different, and I think Anthony touched on it earlier, there were different things other than lead in our water. And so at different points in times, we were told to run the water for a certain period of time. Then we were told, well, boil your water before you use it. You know, and it was just so many things. And then we learned that when you boiled it, you actually made it, the concentration of other chemicals, worse. And so it was like everything we were being told was just really putting us in harm's way, to the point where people really just didn't want to wash their hands in the water. They certainly weren't drinking with it. We couldn't cook with it, you know. So now we're the water bottle capital. You know, we're getting bottled water in from all over the country. People are shipping in 18-wheelers, you know, just donating bottled water to us. And that's how we're living, off bottled water. But, you know, again, in my opinion, there still has not been a resolution that has dealt with the depth of the distrust that has happened here. You know, we feel like they felt that we were expendable. You know, they looked at our community, they saw a high unemployment, high crime, high minority rate, and they said, you know what, let's take a chance on Flint. You know, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But for the pennies, that they saved per day and the fact that they cost people's lives, their health, you know, it just, accountability has to be part of what Dr. Mona was saying, that restorative justice. It's got to be a global picture that comes together so that whatever our sense of justice is, it has to be taken into account when we determine what justice looks like to all of us. And it really hasn't been done to this date.
Does Rick Snyder need to apologize?
I think it would go a long way, but I think, you know, it would be just a step in that direction. An apology, you know, isn't going to help the lost loved ones and the sick loved ones.
Of course not, but
it's more than Rick Snyder. Like, you know, he's one of many villains, but like, and Trishelle touched on this, like there's systemic root causes that helped create this crisis. The loss of trust didn't happen with the water crisis. It was decades in the making because I have a history of chronic racism and neglect and capitalism and greed and the exploitation of this community. Like those are like some of the lost democracy. We didn't even talk about emergency management.
Oh my goodness.
Right.
So, I mean, these are some of these root causes that need to be imprisoned, that help cause the crisis that we need to come to terms with and reckoning with. So, you know, this is a community that had pre-existing lost trust, chronic neglect from the people in power, that social contract you have with folks who are supposed to care for you but no longer have. You know, that was severed, and it was severed a long time ago. And then this crisis happened, and then now the pandemic happened. Another
and there's so many parallels here that people in Flint were lied to about a specific thing, but that came on top of centuries of being lied to about a lot of other stuff. And you have that replicated in the pandemic, and that just trust deficit that is leading to misinformation and
and the denial of science. And like, let's attack scientists and science and basic facts, and same in the pandemic.
So Mona, as someone who has done this, how do you develop trust relationships with the communities you work in?
It takes time. So it takes so much time, and it takes rapport building, and it takes humbly working in partnership, shoulder to shoulder. You know, I'm still in clinic. I'm still seeing patients. I'm still there. And people sometimes they're like, "You're still here? Like, I thought you left somewhere." I'm like, "I'm still here." This trust building will take a really long time. It will take transparency. It will take, you know, complete democracy. It will take, you know, more representation, and it will take, you know, a true effort to kind of attack these root causes that we talked about, this kind of lost democracy and the roots of racism and all these other things, the kind of the white flight and the greed of the industries that left. I mean, like we have to get at these root issues that also help cause the crisis. So, I mean, this is how you rebuild trust. You're there, you're transparent. It's a long-term commitment. I talked about Flint recently at a society of philosophers, and it was just about trust. And one of the philosophers smartly said, well, you know, I think what Flint should have and what every community should have is maybe a healthy dose of mistrust. So I think that's something that I've taken to heart. Like in the beginning of the crisis, you know, I was drinking the Kool-Aid. I was telling my patients that everything was okay because all these folks on top said everything was okay. Like I wish I had that healthy dose of mistrust. And I think that's something we all need to hold folks accountable, to be curious, to ask for more data, a little bit, not a paranoid level, but a healthy dose.
We could all have a whole separate half-hour conversation about emergency management. But I do think it's worth noting that the Governor Snyder's task force that he empowered to look into Flint recommended some serious modifications to the emergency manager law that would allow residents more input, and he did not act on modifying the law, and nor has the current governor. So just if folks want to just know about that and maybe weigh in with their lawmakers, then there it is. There's also a lot of great things. People who want to go deeper into this can read Dr. Mona's book, What the Eyes Can't See. Yes, very good book. And The Poison City by Anna Clark is a really great book to read. And the Michigan Civil Rights Commission's report into how systemic and spatial racism in Flint, especially White folks, this is an amazing read that will help you understand what happened and why it keeps happening. White folks who don't have experience with this, we haven't lived the experience of our friends of color. This is a must read. You can get it online. So few book recs for you there at the end here, but I just want to say we're at the end of our time together, and I really appreciate you all taking the time. Anthony, thank you for making this film. Trishelle, thank you Mona, thank you for the work that you're doing. It's so important and so powerful, and folks like you standing up and doing this work is inspiring. So thank you.
Thank you.